We are right. Looks like we are right at 1:30. So welcome everyone to the SACOG Land Use and Natural Resources Committee for Thursday, November 2nd, 2023. We're going to go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Frost, if you would lead that, please.
Yes, thank you. Stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Thank you, Director Frost. Appreciate that. So next up is roll call.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bulhan.
Here.
Frost.
Here.
Gore.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Kennedy. Absent. Nicely.
Here.
Kozlowski. Absent. West.
Here.
Vice Chair Baines.
Present.
Vice Chair Lozano.
Here.
And Chair Bradford.
Here. Thank you. Next up is public communication. Any person wishing to address the committee on any item not on the agenda may do so at this time. After 10 minutes of testimony, any additional testimony will be heard following the action items. Robert, do we have any hands raised or any public comment?
There is no public comment.
Okay, great. So with that, we will move on to the consent agenda. We have two items. The remote committee meeting and also the minutes from October 5th, 2023. Would anyone from the committee like to pull an item for discussion? Okay, seeing none.
Move to approve by Baines.
Okay,
Second.
Second by West. Sorry, Sue.
That's okay.
so we have a first and a second. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Okay.
There's no public comment.
Great, thank you. So roll call vote, please.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bulhan.
Aye.
Frost.
Aye.
Gore.
Aye.
Harris.
Yes.
Kennedy. Absent. Nicely.
Yes.
Kozlowski. Absent. West.
Yes.
Vice Chair Baines.
Aye.
Vice Chair Lozano.
Aye.
Chair Bradford.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. So next we'll move on to item 3, an information item, the City of Placerville planning activities. So morning, Greg.
Hi, thanks for having me today. So this is an information item. So the last few months, we've been inviting local planners from our member agencies to talk about some of the planning projects that they're working on, both the challenges as well as some of the triumphs, and sharing that with the rest of the region. So recently, in September, we had Placer County come out, and then last month we had West Sacramento. So this month, we got the City of Placerville talking about some of their efforts, particularly on corridor planning and housing. With us today is Pierre Rivas. He's the he's the Development Services Manager at the city for the past 10 years. Prior to that, he was with Kern County for 5 years and El Dorado County Planning for 23 years. And during that time in El Dorado County, he had served as well on the City of Placerville Planning Commission for 4 years and did 2 terms as a city council member for the City of Placerville. And during that time, he also served 3 years on the SACOG board. So with that, Pierre Rivas.
Thank you very much, Greg. I want to thank Greg and the SACOG board for inviting me and having the city be able to present our efforts on the Broadway Commercial Corridor. First question I have, Greg, do I share my screen, or because I can do that, or
Robert will do that. He will share your screen. So just let him know when you're ready to change slides.
Okay, fantastic. So go to the the next slide, please. So I'm going to start with a little background. Let's see. I think we need to go back one more slide. There, background.
You're in for
So I'm going to start with some background. The city of Placerville has been put major efforts in its Broadway corridor for many, many years. So I'm going to go back a while. So back in October of 2007, city staff was working closely with the Broadway Village Association, and they held a grassroots event day. And topics discussed included 5 main topics at that event. And they looked at signage, traffic safety, pedestrian access, outdoor art, landscaping, streetscape, and building architecture. And then following that event, the El Dorado County Transportation Commission made an application to Caltrans on behalf of the city and the association. On October of 2008, the Transportation Commission was then awarded a Caltrans community-based transportation planning grant in the amount of $125,000 to develop the Broadway Village Corridor Multimodal Implementation Plan. So the Broadway Corridor planning effort began in February of 2009 with a technical advisory committee overseeing the effort. And that comprised of Transportation Commission staff, El Dorado County Transit, city staff, and Caltrans staff. Next slide, please. So continuing on, the public review draft of that document was made available in November of 2009. It was presented to the Planning Commission on December of 2009, and then it was given to the City Council on January of 2010. The Broadway plan currently serves as a blueprint for the revitalization of the corridor through a design for a multimodal transportation facilities, and provides a prioritized list of projects to create a mixed-use corridor that we call would embrace complete streets philosophy. Since then, the city has continued to pursue capital improvements projects, investments in the Broadway corridor. Some of these ongoing projects include the Broadway Sidewalks Construction Project, Upper Broadway Bike Lanes Construction, Broadway Schnell Drainage Project, and the Broadway Road Maintenance Project and Broadway Crosswalks Project. Next slide, please. This is an aerial view of the Broadway corridor. Those of you who may have been to Placerville and are familiar with this, you can see that large ribbon of highway that runs through the middle there. That's US Highway 50. And just to the south of that is the Broadway corridor. You can see a lot of those gray areas. Those are actually the parking lots. So it's mainly commercial with residential falling behind those, mainly single family and some multifamily on the north side of the freeway. And on the south side, we got single family residential primary use. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Civic Lab project. This was a regional program that was sponsored by SACOG that sought to address regional issues at the local level. And this is focusing on revitalization of older commercial corridors through creating a sense of place by re-imaging and re-energizing selected commercial corridors, and determine the feasibility of increasing affordable housing through mixed-use development opportunities. And fortunately, Placerville was chosen to participate in this Civic Lab program. And other cities included Yuba City, Isleton, Rancho Cordova, Sacramento, Elk Grove, Lomas. I think I want to highlight one of the things that I found most beneficial was the fact that we were able to collaborate with other member agencies within the SACOG region and actually do field trips, visit their corridors, and we could then collaborate, commiserate, if you will, on issues, problems, and how best to improve these corridors. So I thought that was a really good thing with those field trips. Next slide, please. So basically the city focused on planning efforts, again, on the Upper Broadway area of the city. The Upper Broadway mostly serves residents, but the area also has some vacant and underutilized commercial areas. You could see the flyer on the right. That was one of the Civic Lab flyers that the city produced in year 2, where we identified actual commercial centers where the property owners seem more than willing to assist with maybe revitalizing or providing for mixed use on their projects. You can see down at the bottom, the team involved, the city manager, myself, council members, the mayor at the time. We have an economic advisory committee. We had a member from that committee, and then we have Wendy Thomas, who you probably know. She was former mayor and a property owner too along the Broadway corridor that helped facilitate the effort to revitalize this corridor. Next slide, please. So following the Civic Lab that was that started in 2018, the city, SACOG then made available what's called the Rural Main Streets Technical Assistance Program, and the city received $20,000 in technical assistance grant from SACOG. The local government commission, now I think it's called CivicWell. Back then it was the local government commission. They teamed up with civic staff to look at complete street improvements to improve the corridor, improve pedestrian and bicycle accessibility, and then again, creating a sense of place through landscaping and other gateway treatments, such as signs and different things. The city subsequently received what's called a Regional Early Action Planning Grant, REAP, through SACOG for economic analysis for housing and mixed-use development along the corridor. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some of the products that we got through that Rural Main Streets Technical Assistance Program to provide for an identity for Broadway, such as the signage you see there on the left, and then other treatments, landscaping and such that you see on the right. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the REAP grant. So in 2021, the city was awarded grant funds from the REAP program to support efforts to accelerate housing production in the corridor. It was thought that maybe if we can increase housing within this area, we can then improve the commercial viability through having more people on the streets at the local level, rather than just pulling people off Highway 50. The city did retain a consultant team that comprised Economic and Planning Systems, EPS, Cent Environmental, and that was collectively the team to prepare a strategy to address current and future infill housing needs along the Broadway corridor to revitalize it. The EPS team did conduct several technical analyses, including socioeconomic context assessment, residential market demand study, and reviewed the city's zoning and code design standards. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing market findings. This is what is probably very important, the meat and potatoes of that effort. So Placerville's housing supply is small and has experienced very little growth over the past decade. So the city's approximately 4,700 units represents only 5% of the county's inventory. The city has added an average of about 19 units per year since 2010, and overall the housing production has declined every decade since 2009, with 3% of the housing stock built since 2010. I just want to add that this has recently changed. For example, the old Cottonwood Park development that is just finalized, and they'll be recording the final map, will add 39 single-family homes. We're already poised to issue the building permits for the model homes, and we're getting constant calls on the status. There seems to be a waiting list for people to buy those single-family homes. The city's housing inventory is more diverse in comparison to the county overall, with the majority of housing units in Placerville are single-family detached units, making up 66%. The city does offer a more diverse options than the county. The county's composition of housing is overwhelmingly composed of single-family detached units, making up 82%. The city's housing inventory includes a much higher percentage of structures with duplex and fourplex units, 17%, than the county, that's at 5%. A significant and growing proportion of units in the city are single-family attached units at 4%, but multifamily structures with 5 or more units are less common, with no growth in this housing topology between 2010 and 2021. Still, multifamily structures with 5 or more units comprise the greater proportion of the city's housing inventory, which is 9% of the city compared to the county's 7%. But again, that recently has changed, which I'll get into a little bit later. The housing market in Sacramento region has become more competitive since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic. While Placerville falls in the middle of the affordability and the housing inventory, home prices have increased a whopping 160% since 2012. The 2022 average median sales price is $521,000. It's just, I can't even believe it's gone up to that. And rents have increased by 38% since 2010. The 2022 average asking rent is $1,400 a month. As more people are seeking affordable housing markets, such as the Sacramento region, the total housing market in the city is still continues to be tight. Vacancy rates steadily decreasing from 9.1% in 2010 to 5.6% in 2022. The average inventory dropped from 135 available units to 61 available units in 2014. In fact, I think it's the inventory continues to drop to today. The number of days on the market dropping from 49 to 16. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the future demand. The city is anticipated the need from 260 to 390 residential units by 2035 to accommodate the future housing demand, a small increase from the historical unit absorption. The city did add an average of 18 new residential units per year between 2008 and 2021, comprising 4% of the total of the county's overall growth. The projected housing unit growth is anticipated to increase to an annual average of about 20 to 30 years over the next 12 years, increasing the housing supply from about 6 to 8% by 2035. The county's housing supply is anticipated to increase by 7%, and the city is projected to account for 6% of this growth. If the market rate housing in the city's pipeline has been approved as built, this will fulfill about half of the demand for the market rate single family units and less than 5% of demand for market rate multifamily units. The study estimates projected demand an additional 170 to 253 market rate housing units in the city through 2035. The city's affordable housing pipeline, however, has recently gained momentum with 237 multifamily affordable units currently in review, but not focused in the corridor or the downtown areas, which is unfortunate. All the efforts that I have just described on the Broadway, none of our 3 affordable housing apartment complexes are proposed within this area, though we're happy to get them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. So I'm gonna talk just a little bit about the 3 affordable housing projects that are currently in process. The first one I want to talk a little bit about is the Mallard Apartments. And those of you, again, who know the city, that's at Mallard Lane in McIntosh, which is at the west end of town. And this is funded by a variety of different funding sources. We have the Community Development Block Grant loan for property acquisition at $720,000. We also received an infill infrastructure grant, the IIG, for frontage and offsite improvements. That's $1.1 million there. We also received an SB2 competitive permanent local housing allocation program, CPLHA. This loan covers pre-construction such as architecture and engineering costs at $720,000. We also received the multifamily housing program, the MHP program. That's $11 million. And that's to cover construction costs, and that was through the Pacific Southwest Community Development Corporation. This project will provide for 72 units, 100% affordable to families earning between 30% and 60% of the area median income, the AMI. And this will be held as a 100% affordable project for 55 years. And it's 72 units. Next slide, please. This is the Mallard Apartments site plan. You can see it's well laid out, parking in the interior. I think it's going to be a very nice place to live with various, separate units being built at Mallard and McIntosh. Next slide, please. And there's just an elevation. I was hoping to find a colored elevation, but we only had these, but just to give an idea of what the apartments will look like. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about our second affordable housing project, same developer. This is the Middletown Apartments. This is located at Cold Springs Road and Middletown Road. This project is also funded through Community Development Block Grant as a loan for property acquisition at $120,000. It also received Infill Infrastructure Grant Program for frontage and offsite improvements is $2.1 million. Also received a CPLHA loan for architecture and engineering at $820,000. It also received a multifamily housing program at $13 million for the construction, again through the Pacific Southwest Community Development Corporation. And this project will provide for 82 units. It will be 100% affordable to families earning between 30 and 60% of the AMI, and also held for 55 years. And this will be 82 units. Next slide, please. There's a site plan of what this development will look like. Next slide, please. An elevation. Again, I wish I had a colored elevation. The next one will be a colored elevation for you. The Clementine. So very, very interesting. So again, it was like we won the lottery here. The city of Placerville up until now hasn't produced any multifamily for over 20 years. And so now we have these three 100% affordable projects. The Clementine is located on the former Placerville Armory site. So those of you who know Placerville, it's located near the fairgrounds, not far from the El Dorado County Government Center. It is state-owned. And so the beauty of this project is when the Governor Newsom passed an executive order, and I think this was in 2019, I believe, and it directed the State Department of General Services to seek out surplus property that could then be suitable for affordable housing. And so the city has been working closely with the state, both HCD and the Department of General Services, on developing the site. The state put out an RFP. They selected Jamboree as the contractor. They do a lot of affordable housing projects throughout the state. This project will comprise 83 units and will also be 100% affordable. Next slide, please. There's a artist rendition of what this apartment will look like. And then on the right there, you see a map of where it's located within the city. You can see Highway 50 there at the bottom, and then Placerville Drive as you head up to Ray Lawyer Drive. It's right there by the fairgrounds. So I think that sort of concludes my slideshow, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about what are some of the takeaways that the city has regarding Broadway. So one, the problem with Broadway, basically that made it so where redevelopment was not feasible for doing mixed use and trying to include residential development within that corridor, is the cost of redevelopment of the existing commercial sites. Cost per square foot did not necessarily equate to a reduction in the cost with economies of scales. So I think it was just cost prohibitive. We felt that the demand wasn't there that would support the investment necessary to do the redevelopment of these older commercial sites, a lot of them being developed in the 60s and 70s. Post-pandemic has exacerbated the cost of construction, both in terms of materials and labor. The Housing Opportunities Study will continue to serve as an invaluable planning document for future developers and investors. I want to talk a little bit about the very far eastern end of Broadway. That's the Carriage Trade Center. It's now been purchased by a local developer who is re-imaging that entire center. That's used to be, for those of you who've been here a long time, it was the Beano's, and now it's a grocery outlet. It was about 50% vacant. It was owned by a out-of-town investor who didn't put any money into it. The city was, some years ago, the city tried to create a redevelopment agency. And our hope was to either compel the owner to start reinvesting on the property, or the city was probably going to seize that property and make it into a redevelopment area. But needless to say, you know, he aged out, sold the property. We have a developer that now has bought it. A Harbor Freight is going to go in there, re-imaging the whole thing, redoing the whole parking lot, putting in landscaping. We're very, very pleased. The city has received interest in residential development further to the east, so outside of our project area, but we are very happy that now we see additional interest in more housing projects to the east of our study area. So then the last thing I want to tell the panel is, why were we so successful with these 3 affordable housing projects? Again, like I said earlier, the city hasn't seen an apartment of any kind in over 20 years. So all of a sudden we have all these projects. I call it an alignment of the stars. So the city was very proactive. We created the 2 sites by pre-planning for affordable housing, which what we call the Housing Opportunity Overlay Zone. We had actually created a high density multifamily residential zone, and every time we applied it to private property, the private property owner would then challenge the city with inverse condemnation. You can't apply that high density residential on the property, and we can't develop it anything else. It's a taking. There's no demand for that. So we looked at what other jurisdictions had done, and so the way we did it was creating an overlay zone. So the overlay zone would be laid on top of the base zone, so that the owner can rest assured that they're left whole. If it's single family residential or it's commercial or whatever the zoning allows, the base zone, they can still develop under that zoning. But it allowed for a developer that maybe had grant opportunities or other affordable housing opportunities to come in, buy that land, and then develop the property as affordable housing project by right. So the city did the environmental by right. We did the general plan amendment and rezone by right to add that overlay. I think that was, from what I've heard, the feedback I've gotten from the developers is that was probably one of the #1 reasons why these sites were plucked out of our whole inventory, and they went ahead and sought to develop them. One of the other things that we had is we did have a developer willing to build affordable housing, and that's hard to find. We have all the funding as outlined for the 2 projects. We have an experienced person that is currently serving as a consultant to the developer. You may know him. His name's Chris Westlake. He was former deputy director of HCD. So there's somebody that really knows the ins and outs of all the funding sources and how to get through the mazes of satisfying all the different funding sources that we're using, all the reporting and everything else. So very fortunate there. And then last but not least, we did have that state-owned property that was identified following Newsom's executive order that was signed in 2019. So the last thing I want to say, and I say this every time I get a chance to talk about affordable housing. Those of you that or talk with the state legislatures, do something about short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are now, ever since, and we really saw that following, during and after the pandemic. We have a lot of out-of-town investors, people buying up our affordable housing stock and turning them into short-term rentals. We do not allow them currently in the city, except in certain commercial zones. But they're coming they're problematic for us. I'm sure they are for other communities. They're snuck in there. It's hard to enforce. So I just implore the state is doing, every time I turn around, there's a new housing law to do this and do that for affordable housing, but they do nothing on short-term rentals. That's lodging, and it sucks up housing supply. So anyways, thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to showcase the city's Broadway corridor and our affordable housing projects. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Rivas. So any questions from committee members? Director Nicely.
Yeah, I just have one. With the affordable housing projects, the 3 that you have coming, how much staff time is that going to take? Are you going to have to hire someone for who who manages that for 55 years to make sure they're staying within the affordable zone, or, you know?
We're all under contract. So each of these funding sources that they have there's a contract. So the city entered into contracts with the funding source, typically HCD. And so we oversee, and so we provided the money to them as a loan for the 55 years to maintain it affordable housing. They will have they'll have management managing those apartments. The state-owned property, that's Jamboree, and they will manage those apartments.
So they manage it and then give you the report, and then you report to the state that you're
That's correct.
keeping it. Okay. Thank
Yes.
you.
Any additional questions? I've got a couple. So you talked about the Broadway corridor and wanting to redevelop some of the commercial to maybe higher density residential. You talked a little bit about the cost challenges associated with that, particularly
Yes.
labor. I assume the answer is yes, but infrastructure costs also a challenge? And is that one of the big challenges, like water, wastewater, power as well? Or was it really more on the construction side and the labor to remove existing buildings and things like that?
That's a very good question. The city did engage in a very comprehensive upgrade of its wastewater treatment plant back in 2009. So we have sufficient capacity that could, basically full build out of the city, including its areas located within its sphere of influence it can serve. So piping has been a problem, size of piping. So that is something we are looking at. The city is engaged. The city passed Measure L and Measure H. And so that was a sales tax where we're using those funds to upgrade our water and sewer lines. So we've been doing that diligently, and we upgrade them then to serve future capacity as well. We have done a lot of capacity upgrades within the area, but primarily I think it's what you said. Because these buildings are built in the 1960s and 70s, they're not going to accommodate actually building a second or third story on top of them. So you're looking at a complete raising of the site and building completely new. And just from a market standpoint, it just wasn't there to invest. And so, but we are seeing, though, is interest in some of the undeveloped parcels that are located even further east, just outside of the project area, east of where the Carriage Trade Center, now called the Marketplace Center, is for housing projects. So they've been coming in. I'm really, really surprised because I always hear how bad the economy is, but there does seem to be a large interest in further development in this area. And I think the big catalyst is going to be that old tired shopping center, because it was looking bad. It was basically a deterrent to developers who would come in and want to develop. They would take one look at that and I go, well, I'm not going to invest here, where I think that's going to turn around once they complete their improvements and Harbor Freights moves in.
Great, thank you. I do not see any additional questions at this time. Any public comment on this item, Robert?
There's no public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Mr. Rivas.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, next we're going to move on to item 4, Blueprint 2025 Blueprint discussion. Discussion of land use and transportation strategies for greenhouse gas reduction and advancing the triple bottom line. Zach, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Director Bradford. My name is Zach Miller, and I am the program manager for the MTP SCS, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategies planning document, and which we more frequently refer to as the 2025 Blueprint. So let's jump right into this. So as we learned at our last meeting, achieving the region's GHG target is going to be a challenge for the 2025 Blueprint. And that's not to say that it's not achievable, but we're really going to need to critically look at all the strategies available to us in order to continue to work towards achieving this target. So the primary intent of this presentation will be to really examine some of the available GHG reduction strategies and highlight the associated co-benefits of those strategies across the triple bottom line of environment, economy, and equity. So I'll be going through a small sample of the available strategies. These strategies were selected based on some of the comments and questions we've heard from this committee, as well as other committees and the board over the past year. So we'll start with a little bit of background just to make sure we're all on the same page. And this may be repeat information for many of you, apologies. But what is the 2025 blueprint? So one of SACOG's major jobs as designated by the federal government and as required under Senate Bill 375 is to maintain a regional transportation plan. So this plan really lays out a set of strategies for an integrated multimodal transportation system, as well as a regional development pattern that can create a more thriving region that works for all residents. So the plan outlines recommendations for public land use policy and transportation investment strategies for the SACOG region over the next 20 to 30 years. And as I alluded to, it includes what's called a sustainable community strategy, or what I'll be calling a SCS from here on out, which this portion of the document needs to demonstrate how the region could achieve the state mandated GHG emissions reductions from passenger vehicles through integrated land use and transportation planning. And then also the 2025 blueprint will be shaped by the triple bottom line that was adopted by the board last year. So the triple bottom line framework uses the 3 overarching goals of economy, environment, and equity. And this will really be used to shape the discussions as well as the strategies for the blueprint moving forward. And this plan really aims to come together around a collective vision to advance economic prosperity in the region, support environmental health and resiliency for the SACOG region, and also promote equity through reducing transportation and housing disparities. So as a bit of a refresher from the last presentation that was delivered by my colleague Kyle Shipley in October, as it relates to the greenhouse gas reduction target. So in 2018, CARB adopted more aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets as one measure to support progress towards state goals. So the revised greenhouse gas reduction target for our region, the SACOG region, was set by the California Air Resources Board at 19% per capita by 2035, and that's relative to the baseline year of 2005. So just of note here, all 3 previous MTPSCSs for our region, the SACOG region, showed we would achieve the GHG reduction target if implemented. And moving on, if an MPO is not able to meet the regional target, they must prepare what's called a alternative planning strategy, or APS. And the APS needs to show how the region could potentially meet that target in the future. So beyond the cost of preparation and maintenance of an APS, the main risk to SACOG and its member agencies associated with preparation of this APS document in place of an SCS would be the potential loss of some CEQA streamlining benefits, and then also potential loss of certain competitive grants, competitive state grants. So there's several state funding programs that require the region to have an adopted SCS, not an APS, in order to compete for funding. We did some calculations in-house at SACOG, and we estimate that in totality since about 2018, the SACOG region has received over $1 billion in transportation funding from these state competitive grant programs that require an SCS. So this is roughly double the amount that SACOG has available to program and allocate from other regional funding programs. So moving on. So today we're going to be discussing specific land use and transportation strategies that could be used to reduce vehicle miles traveled, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And we'll be diving into the co-benefits of these strategies. I would like to acknowledge at the onset here that we have choices throughout the region, and a one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily going to be the answer here. And that's in several different contexts. So for example, the one-size-fits-all approach to housing is probably not the best approach. We've been growing with a primarily focusing on large lot suburban development. And we've heard that through our extensive public outreach and engagement, that there is a need and an acknowledgement that there is a need for more choice within the region when it comes to housing. Then also the one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to work when we think about how to apply greenhouse gas reduction strategies, as all strategies are not directly applicable in all jurisdictions and in all geographies throughout the region. So as we go through these strategies, I would like you all to keep the question listed here in mind so that we can hopefully have a discussion at the end of this presentation related to what might help make the blueprint more meaningful to your local jurisdiction moving forward. So I want to start with a couple of strategies listed here. So electric vehicles and telework. So these specific strategies came up in October committee meetings and have come up throughout the year at other board and committee meetings. And I hope to provide a bit of clarity and reasoning behind why these strategies can't solely be relied upon to meet our greenhouse gas reduction target for the region. So starting with electric vehicles, bear with me a bit here. There's we get into some state legislation here and language. So Senate Bill 375 indicates that MPOs may not take credit for state programs and policies that improve vehicle emission standards, changes in fuel consumption, and other state measures that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's relative to when you're quantifying greenhouse gas emissions and trying to meet them for the purposes of a MTP-SCS or our blueprint.
Hey, Zach,
So-
I don't want to interrupt, but could you just say that again? I want to double check what I thought I heard you say.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 375 indicates that MPOs may not take credit for state programs and policies that improve vehicle emission standards, changes in fuel consumption, and other state measures that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, so in like layman's terms, right, we're supposed to meet this goal of HGH reduction, and then the state has mandated more electric vehicles and a changing fleet, vehicles to electric, and all of those gains we cannot utilize in our communities.
Well, we can't take credit for those in our quantification of greenhouse gas emissions for the purposes of this plan.
So
So
even
the
though
thinking-
we're going to have some gains at some point, we can't bank on those to meet we still have to meet that 19%, irregardless of that, or it's just not one of our strategies.
Correct. So essentially what's happening is that those reductions associated with fleet turnover to electric vehicles or ZEVs, that is already baked into the calculations that are done for statewide reductions of emissions.
Okay, so
And
we still
so-
have to meet our own goals.
Yeah, so we have a sliver of the pie other than these state programs that we need to achieve. So we have the percentage of GHG reductions, the 19% that we have to achieve as a region. And that's on top of all the programs and policies, legislation that the state is doing statewide. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay.
So
Sorry to
Zach,
interrupt.
oh, no, thank you for interrupting, Director Gore. So just to follow up with that point a little bit, and these numbers might, in fact, I'm sure they're off, but just as an example, a numerical example, so just to make sure I understand as well. So let's say that the goal is to reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, right? And so the state is essentially taking credit for, let's say, 30% of that number through, the things you mentioned, switching to EVs, better fuel economy, those kind of things. And they're saying, hey, SACOG, you need to do 19%. Or I guess in my example, they technically would be doing 31% and we'd be doing 19%. And then together, that's how we would get to the 50%. Other than those numbers not being exact on the state side, is that kind of the general idea?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Bradford, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to note that, so the Air Resources Board identifies that, market forces as well as state and federal policy and programs are really what's driving this push to electric vehicles and not regional policies such that could be included in our plan.
If this is helpful, Chair Bradford, Director Gore, I think where the state's coming from is we have state policies, right? There's a state policy that you can't sell internal combustion engine 2035. You're right, I think, to describe this, there's a bucket of stuff the state is looking at doing by state policy. And so actually the state's sort of overall greenhouse gas reduction target is greater than 19%. So there's state things the state says we're doing this. And then they're asking all of us as regions, including ours, what's in your control and what can you do? And so we are looking at, again, primarily growth, development, jobs, housing near jobs, transit, transportation options, land use, pricing strategies, because we've talked a little bit about tolling and toll lanes, and we don't have any yet, but actually that has potentially some pretty good demand management benefits. Heretofore, I will just say in the past, if we could say that we're doing a regional program to accelerate electric vehicle adoption over and above, like we're putting out charging stations and that's our thing. Heretofore, you could have gotten some credit for that, but it is a gray area. But it's basically what's in our control, what can we do? And then there's a state bucket of reductions that come on the state side that are sort of, they see as state policy, legislation, things that the state is doing. I'm trying to explain it as simply as I can.
Thank you, James.
Exactly. I can add something really quick. So the state's scoping plan, which is kind of outlines the strategy to get to carbon neutral by 2045. That's the state's stated goal. By 2035, we're still assuming, and you can see this in the scoping plan, even with electric vehicle penetration and all of the market forces, state legislation, federal investment in electric vehicles, we're still going to have upwards of a third of vehicles on the road are internal combustion. So to get to that 2035 target and then ultimately to that 2045 carbon neutrality, there is the need to go electric, but then there's remaining internal combustion engines on the roadways. And the state is looking to regions to help reduce VMT from those over time. And so the reason that we're limited on getting the electric vehicle credit is that that is taken account for. There's still a gap between what the state needs to reduce and the electric vehicle penetration, and that some of that comes from VMT reduction. Statewide, they think they need about 25% VMT reduction per capita to actually achieve that. They're not assigning all of that to MPOs. Ours is 19% reduction, but there's still a gap at the state. So it's a way of avoiding double counting for the electric vehicles and acknowledging that just electric alone doesn't get us all the way to carbon neutral by 2045.
Thank you.
All right. So then moving on to telework. It's undeniable, really, that telework is fundamentally changing the landscape of transportation in terms of travel patterns. But the vehicle miles traveled and the associated greenhouse gas emissions associated with telework is really a much more complex story. There are different forms of telework, obviously. Part-time telework, or some individuals are full-time working from home. Others are going in a couple days a week. Some are going in half days, certain days a week, etc. But from an overarching perspective, some studies and data have shown that, well, the trip length for teleworkers has decreased as a result of not having to travel into their office or work site. The actual vehicle miles traveled of those same individuals, those same workers, has increased due to an increase in the number of trips taken throughout the day. So think of this as you're teleworking, you're working from home, you're able to take more discretionary trips. You're able to go run errands, go pick your kids up at school and drop them off, and make other discretionary trips through the day when, if working in an office, fairly distant from your home, you may not have that same flexibility to make those sorts of trips. So additionally, some studies and data shows that VMT in different geographic locations as expected, responds differently to teleworking. So some suburban jurisdictions become more VMT efficient with increases in telework, while others, similar areas, may not see those same reductions. So that's just all to say that telework it's a fairly complex issue. We're actively studying it right now using a variety of different data sources. And it's going to be the increase in telework is going to be incorporated into our modeling and greenhouse gas reduction quantification. However, telework appears to be a strategy that we really need to study more so. But that's all just to say it's not a silver bullet that can be expected to singularly achieve our greenhouse gas target moving forward. So in summary, both these strategies we just discussed, electric vehicles and telework, they're both important and effective strategies, obviously, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's only going to get us so far in achieving our GHG reduction target, and we're going to need to look at other strategies as well. So now the strategies that I'm about to present are really examples of how we can consider GHG reduction strategies through a broader lens that goes beyond just that GHG reduction potential. So while these strategies may help the region achieve the greenhouse gas target, we need to also be considering the co-benefits that these strategies will also achieve. So in fact, the best policies and strategies at our disposal will likely advance multiple objectives and tie back to the triple bottom line and help shape and maintain this as a region where people really want to live. So one of the primary land use strategies as it relates to reducing GHG emissions is increasing residential and or jobs density. So this is obviously a land use strategy. As I mentioned before, the SES needs to demonstrate how the region could achieve the state mandated reductions of greenhouse gases through integrated land use and transportation planning. And this strategy very much hits that intersection of land use and transportation planning. So with increased densities, residential and or jobs, this can really affect the distance people have to travel and also provide greater options for the modes of travel and the options and choices that they have. So increasing residential or jobs density generally results in shorter and fewer trips by single occupancy vehicles, and thus you get a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And then it's also important to note here that when you pair these two measures, the increase in jobs density and increase in residential density, the cumulative kind of densification of these measures can result in a highly walkable, bikeable area and yield increased co-benefits in GHG and VMT reductions, along with improved public health and social equity, which I'll be getting into a bit. So at this point, I want to acknowledge that not every strategy is going to work in every part of the region, or strategies may look different depending on the location where they're deployed. For example, increasing density in a downtown may take the form of vertical density, building upwards, while in other more rural and or suburban areas, it might be more horizontal in nature. It's important to note here, I think, that concentrating density where it makes sense, say in or around centers and corridors or established communities, can really take development pressure off more rural parts of the region, especially in those areas that want to stay rural. So in the context of jobs density, it may make sense in some suburban areas to protect commercial and other employment uses from converting to residential uses, or generally just increasing employment uses in these residential areas, which will help put jobs, shopping, and services closer to where people are already living, and thus shorten trips and reduce number of trips by single occupancy vehicle. So that's all to say that when thinking about the strategies available to us, it's more about working together in the regional context and coming up with context-sensitive solutions that work in various locations throughout our diverse region to preserve really what makes this region special, of and provide a diversity of places and options for residents. So getting into some of the co-benefits here, the reduction in vehicle trips associated with these two land use strategies that I'm speaking of will not only reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also going to result in a reduction in air pollutants. So this not only helps us achieve our greenhouse gas reduction target, but it also helps address federal Clean Air Act requirements, which also must be addressed in the plan. The increased vehicle fuel savings that'll be realized through the reduction in number of trips and personal automobile vehicle travel will be realized. And this will keep more money in residents' pockets. And then also as it pertains to public health, you may remember there was a presentation given by UD4H a few months back to this committee. And during that presentation, research was shared on public health of the pathways, the 3 pathways that we were examining. So this analysis really showed that pathway 1, which was by far the most dispersed, spread out land use development pattern, had the highest rates of several health indicators, including body mass index, obesity, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, as well as hypertension. Well, pathway 3, which includes the most compact land use development pattern, which would be most consistent with the strategies we're talking about here, the density of housing density as well as jobs density. That pathway had the lowest rates of those health indicators. So the difference in these outcomes, it was determined, was largely a product of the extent to which the built environment in each pathway facilitates physical movement as part of daily travel to destinations. And it also noted in that presentation that the resulting economic outlook of these health metrics has implications for the regional cost of illness as well. And finally, in terms of the equity benefits of this strategy, it really cuts across most of the co-benefits. For example, disadvantaged communities typically have a greater preponderance of localized air quality impacts, which I noted this strategy would help address. And then similarly, disadvantaged communities also have a high incidence of asthma and heart disease, which I noted earlier, this strategy would also help reduce, thus improving equity in our region. So as you can see, not only do these 2 potential strategies help us achieve our greenhouse gas reduction target for the purposes of our SCS, but it also ties directly into and really helps achieve all aspects of our triple bottom line of environment, economy, and equity. Now getting into a more transportation-centric strategy, the second measure is the provision of school bus service. And so this was a measure that we've heard interest in from several of our committees. So this is essentially, it's school bus service that can reduce the number of private vehicle trips to drop off or pick up students, which can actually substantially reduce daily trips and thereby reduce vehicle miles traveled and associated greenhouse gas reductions. So in terms of the co-benefits, through the reduction of trips, this strategy will also reduce localized air pollution, similar to the previous strategies, especially if the bus is zero emissions. And so this would also help address the Federal Clean Air Act requirements mandated as part of the plan. And then the strategy can also result in bicycle and pedestrian safety co-benefits by reducing the number of vehicles accessing the school during pickup and drop off, and really help provide a safer biking environment for students who use those modes of transportation to get to and from school. Just a small personal anecdote. I know when I drop my kids off at school and pick them up, it's absolute chaos. It can get extremely unsafe for those students who are walking to or bicycling to school. And many of these school sites just aren't set up to handle that kind of crush of cars all at one time. So this does have real kind of safety impacts and safety co-benefits. Then from an equity perspective, this strategy can also help provide transportation to and from school, obviously, for students and families who may not have access to personal vehicles or may only have one vehicle and need to use that vehicle for other purposes throughout the day. So this is a program that we're going to be looking into further to better understand how the region can play a role. There is a complicated set of state laws and on how school bus programs are funded and operated. So we're doing our due diligence to investigate that. And we know it can certainly have an impact. It may seem like a small strategy or something that may not be that effective on its face, but it can really reduce the number of trips throughout the day. If you think of the total number of school children and all those trips needed to get them to or from schools throughout the day. And then here are some additional strategies that I'll be briefly discussing. So EV charging infrastructure, we touched on that earlier. Essentially, as James had mentioned, if you are able to accelerate the rate at which there is absorption of EVs into the market, you can take some credit for that when quantifying your greenhouse gas emissions. When it comes to transportation demand management, micromobility, and transit, these are all strategies that are designed to increase the efficiency of the transportation system and reduce demand on the system. So these strategies would all result in many of the same co-benefits as the previous strategies. I went into a bit more detail on the school bus program, as well as the densification of housing as well as jobs. And so it has, many of the same benefits and co-benefits as it pertains to air quality, public health, and equity. So additionally, I think taking cars off the road would have an additional economic benefit that I haven't touched on yet, and that is reducing the wear and tear on our roadways and the associated costs of maintenance of repair of those roadways. And then for transit specifically, there are very tangible equity benefits here that would be achieved in that transit can provide an alternative to driving, obviously, but it's also a lifeline for many households without readily available access to personal vehicles to get from one place to another. So as you can see, most of the GHG reduction strategies I presented here today, and most of the GHG reduction strategies generally have co-benefits that really cut across one, if not all, of our triple bottom line goals. And it's really important to note here that thinking through the local land use context and applicability of each strategy is essential. So after going through all these strategies, I would like to reiterate that we're going to need to consider many of these strategies moving forward as tools for achieving not only our GHG reduction target, but also adhering to our triple bottom line for this plan. So just to give you a sneak preview of some GHG presentations to come, likely in spring or early summer of 2024, we're going to be delivering a presentation on the preliminary greenhouse gas results for the discussion scenario that we're currently finalizing. And then there's also policy options and measures used by other MPOs that we'll be going into as well to just examine what other metropolitan planning organizations such as SACOG have been using across the state in their comparable documents. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions you may have, and if there are any comments on the question that I posed earlier about what might help make the blueprint more meaningful to your jurisdiction, I would love to hear those comments and that feedback as well.
Thank you, Zach. Committee members, what kind of questions, comments? I know I've got several, so Director Nisley.
I haven't exactly thought this through, but it occurred to me as a mother of three and having to take my kids to and from band practice and soccer, and water polo and all those different things that, yes, having a bus that took them to school and back to school would be great. Of course, they were all different ages, but maybe a rotating, almost like a bus system that, for public transportation where it comes every half hour and it can pick up the kids that are finishing up one, I mean, I haven't thought this through, but I'm just thinking that there are a lot of parents going out there and they're driving back and forth because they've got kids in different things. And if there was a system where they could pick them up and bring them home more than just once a day, it might help. But anyway, that's all.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. That's an interesting thought. And it makes me think of some of the other strategies I didn't present on today, but there are, you know, a variety of other greenhouse gas reduction strategies I haven't heard of being used for these express purposes, but, you know, van pools, carpool type programs, matching programs, stuff like that, that could potentially be another effective strategy for school-age children.
Thanks, Director Nicely. Vice Chair Lozano.
Yeah, just a comment about the different strategies. I appreciate the presentation. It's very well done, very easy to understand. One of the comments that I have is, and I think I've made this comment before, is that we need to do things as we're looking at all these, do things so that it allows people to feel comfortable getting out of their cars. If at some point in a small community like mine, where, you know, half of the people who work out of the area, don't work in my town, yet they have to drop kids off at school. There's not always enough time to walk your kid to school, come back, get in your car and go, or grab public transit and go to work. So I just think as we're moving forward, that one of the things we really need to think about is whatever alternatives we come up with to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, there has to be an education piece to the community so that people feel comfortable. You know, I worked in and around schools for 30 years and dealt with traffic and traffic planning around schools. And the idea that planning or providing a different resource is going to change the minds of the parents who are afraid of the scary people that are out there that might get their children it needs to be thought through a little more, because it's just not the case. You know, when we had schools in communities that were developed as walkable communities, we still had lines of cars. And so I think it's a mindset of education and also trying to get people to understand that it is safe to walk with a group of people to school, that, you know, preventing the parents from putting extra miles on the car, getting them there, and then going to work. So just a couple of thoughts, and I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lozano. Okay, I'll throw out one of mine. One of the things you talked about was how telework has really changed transit use. And I've mentioned this before, and I'm wondering if there's maybe opportunities for SACOG to do some funding of some pilot programs looking at transit opportunities for evening entertainment in the region. So, you know, I know if you live off of light rail, it's easy to maybe hop on light rail and go downtown to Golden One or maybe other RT. But if you're in the outlying areas, certainly Yuba Sutter, and I'm guessing the same is the case, you know, in Galt and in El Dorado County and Placer County, like you can't get on the bus and take it to Golden One Center and go downtown to Sacramento for dinner and then come back after that. And I just feel like there's got to be a demand for that. And I think it's really something we should be looking at to at least explore how we can do that. And conversely, not just to the urban core, but I know, you know, my district has a growing kind of entertainment hub with, you know, Hard Rock and certainly the amphitheater, and getting folks from elsewhere in the region to those venues when there's events going on, or even when there's, you know, just on a regular basis to stuff going on at Hard Rock or other entertainment venues in the region in the outlying area. You know, I think people would be, again, speaking from my own experience, I'd be very receptive to taking public transit to entertainment kinds of things in the evening if it was convenient and affordable. And I think it's something we need to be working with our transit partners to figure out, is there really a demand, and how do we explore that and potentially, you know, help with that opportunity if it exists. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And it makes me think of, you know, we have commuter buses for traveling into and out of, you know, the downtown Sacramento core, for example. If there is enough demand for large venues for entertainment purposes or what have you, instituting some sort of shuttle system and or, you know, temporary bus routes and shuttling to those locations, that could definitely be an effective strategy. So we will look into that.
And a way to look into it is the city of Roseville does it currently with Roseville Transit, and they take bus loads of people to the arena or Golden One for basketball games. And it meets downtown. People get on the bus. We have parking structures. People get on the bus downtown. It's cheap, and you can go drink, have a great time. Somebody drives you, and it's been really, really effective. And we've been doing it since actually Golden One opened, I believe. So it's been, I don't know, at least 4 years. And that's a really good point, Director Bradford, because there are opportunities to do that. And I hadn't thought about just going downtown, but right, groups of people wanting to go to whether it's Thunder Valley or to the Elk Grove Casino or to Hard Rock, where you have it's certainly worth it, because at least you know, I think about like people in Citrus Heights, right? A whole lot easier to get on a bus and go to Golden One versus everybody having to drive. And maybe it's a small thing, but to your point, I think it's worth transit agencies thinking about and talking about. And you certainly can talk to Roseville, because it's my understanding it's still taking place.
Thanks for sharing that, Director Gore. I'm glad to hear that that's successful. It doesn't surprise me that it is, at least based on, you know, what I could envision myself using transit for. So, okay, any additional?
Does anybody have feedback on the question that I posed? Kind of what might help make the blueprint more meaningful to your local jurisdiction? I know Director Lozano, you got into that a bit, but is there any other feedback on that? And also I would welcome any feedback, obviously, after this presentation as well, if you like to get in contact with me and have discussions related to your specific jurisdiction and some of the strategies you heard about today, or that you are aware of that you think might be most applicable in your jurisdictions.
I have a question. And in regards to what you mentioned sort of early on in the presentation about ultimately regional cooperation, right? Because we as a region are supposed to hit this goal, right? And we know people do not want to get out of their cars. I mean, that's the state's objective, and people don't want to do that. And then there's all these reasons to not use transit for folks. And clearly one of the better ways to address a lot of this is infill development, right? You showed that and we understand that, but where do you get a lot of good infill development? Like, honestly, you can do some in the city centers of each of our communities, but you can only do so much of that, right? Galt is small and Loomis is small, and, you know, Roseville is bigger and they can do more density. And certainly you have Sacramento, but like I don't know. It's like the whole regional cooperation, right? So are there areas that Sacramento, Roseville can do more dense development, and we all support that benefits everyone? Because that's the challenge, right? Because there's a trade-off with funding. Right? You put more money into Sacramento to like maybe do green means go dollars so that they could actually build some infrastructure and get it done, but then it benefits all of us. Because I just don't see, I mean, I see infill as being the best way to do it, but not everybody wants to live in high density housing, and most people don't. So this is so frustrating.
Yeah, I think
I hear all your great ideas, and I'm like, and the reality is we're not going to get them out of our cars.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's a great point. I will also note, you know, a couple different things. One being that through land use inventories, we've identified that with the projected growth that we anticipate through 2035 and then 2050, we have enough infill land and infill opportunity areas to accommodate essentially all that growth. It's a matter, there are some barriers to implementing that infill development. Obviously, that was discussed in the previous presentation. You know, there's some infrastructure impediments, you know, pipeline sizing, stuff of that nature. But infill development doesn't, as I noted in my earlier, it looks different in different areas too. It doesn't necessarily have to be vertical, high density growth in, you know, central downtown areas of whether it's downtown Roseville or downtown Sacramento. It can also just be filling in even horizontally in a manner that takes into account, you know, VMT efficiency and other different factors and efficiency metrics, as opposed to, you know, more leapfrog development that is more far-flung development that may not have, that would require a lot more travel to get to destinations. Because as you noted, it is difficult to get people out of their cars. So land use strategies, infill, and housing and jobs densification really is probably the most powerful tool we have to accomplish that.
Yes, and then all of our jurisdictions have plans for growth, right? I mean, I've got 5 specific plans in Placer County right now of lots of homes being built. And City of Roseville's got a couple, and right, like, and that's not infill, that's greenfield. And people want that, and they don't, and then the developers want to develop there. They don't want to develop infield because it costs so much more. Right. And we've seen all these great examples, but I don't know how you incentivize a developer to do just that. I mean, I think the Green Wings Go helps because if we provide the infrastructure, then there's more likely to do that. But
yeah,
this is very frustrating, and I don't want to be you, but I also don't want to be me. This is just, it's like, it feels so untenable, to be really honest, and I won't go on my soapbox, so I'll just stop because I'll just get frustrated.
And one thing I want to mention as well, a point you made, Director Gore, about the demand being more so on the side of, you know, more greenfield development, essentially. In the extensive outreach and engagement we did, we saw that desire, you know, that was a desire amongst a large percentage of people, you know, a little over 50%, I think, if I'm recalling correctly. But there was also an acknowledgement that we needed more smaller lot development, more affordable, just generally market rate affordable housing for those individuals, even though the aspiration is to be out and have one of these large lot, you know, single family homes. You might not be in a stage of life where that's tenable from a financial perspective. And you need those options to make this area more affordable and livable for everybody as well. So that's another good reason to really push on, you know, infill and some of these more infill and residential density projects. So
yeah, good point. Thank you, Zach.
Director Gore, can I add on this too? I appreciate your very honest and real, you know, struggle, right? with you just sort of setting up like this. I don't know how we do this, but I just want to build a little bit of what Zach was saying. We tend to have these very difficult conversations about regional growth challenges in a very binary way. So when we say we can't get people out of their cars, that's because it's very hard to get people out of their cars. But I don't think actually that's the right necessarily. We'd love to get some people out of their cars. We'd like to actually get some trips to be taken down to Golden One a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, it's not a, you know, 100% everybody drives or 100% everybody takes transit, right? Because neither one of those things actually is accurate. If you look at some of the most successful metropolitan regions around the world, their transit share is 15, 20, 25%. They're not even breaking 50. So what we're also really trying to figure out is how do we get people so when they do get in their cars, they don't have to drive as far. You know, they're sitting in as much traffic. And I keep on, One of the most remarkable areas where that is true is Yuba City, Marysville. Yuba City and Marysville has some of the lowest average miles driven by their residents. And as the folks up there know, not because everybody's riding their bike or they've all given up their cars and now they're riding a bus. Some people are doing that, but they're basically surrounded by a natural green belt, which is floodplain and unbuildable land and levees, and everything is basically within a very easy drive. And so that actually is something that's convenient, right? But it also is lower vehicle miles traveled. And then as Zach just said, remember the 3 pathways we showed you earlier this year, right? And we looked at like very heavy infill, very heavy greenfield, and everything in between. I want to remind you all, none of those by 2050 is anything other than majority single family homes in the region. None of them. It's all about whether we are providing 20% multifamily, 30% multifamily, right? So we tend to have these kind of like everybody's going to live in multifamily or everybody's going to live in single family, and that is untenable, because that's what's actually the nuance. But really important is those kind of the demand that we believe is out there for multifamily. We did the poll with Valley Vision, right? Most people want to live in a single family home, but guess what? 35% of people, 38% want multifamily, and we're not providing that product type to that segment of the market, right? So I want to, in case you're feeling like this is actually really hard and it'll never happen, I want to make sure we set our sights right on the things that the balance really. It's a balanced, diverse portfolio. In our current SES long-range plan, we've got greenfield growth. We've got some suburban infill, and we've got some urban infill, right? Striking that balance is hard, but that's really what we're trying to achieve.
So I kind of wanted to follow up on that too. It was kind of the other thing that I wanted to mention, and it adds kind of to what Director Gore said, and also kind of what Zach shared, and just kind of my experience, right? When we see polling, we see that the region wants a diversity of housing types, and the region wants a diversity of housing type all over, right? I don't think people want just, high density in the urban core, and they don't want just large single family out in, Placer County and Yuba Sutter, right? There's people that want to live in Yuba Sutter that want the missing middle as well, right? And I'm sure the same is true in Placer County, and whether that is infill or even within our greenfield development, having that more diverse. And I know in some areas maybe that diversity is increasing. I haven't necessarily seen it increasing quite as much in particularly in Yuba Sutter, but I know a little bit. But there seems to be kind of a disconnect between what residents are saying they want and what developers think residents want, and what maybe pencils out for developers. Because I mean, I've talked to developers about, hey, what about doing, some other kinds of development in Plumas Lake? So a little bit, denser, smaller lots, and maybe multifamily or duplex or whatever. And it's usually like, well, that doesn't pencil out, or there's not the demand for that. And so I think, but when I talk to residents, that's not what I hear. I hear they, a lot of them do want a mix of housing types, a variety of options, and they all want, walkability. They love walkability and, more options for shopping and local employment and all those kind of things. So it seems like residents want what we're talking about, but it seems like we just can't get there. And there seems to be this cost barrier. There seems to be this maybe perceived, there's not a demand for that. And those folks, those developers are probably the experts, not me, when it comes to what that demand really is. But it just seems to me that there's this disconnect. And, I know jurisdictions obviously force some of that through zoning, but then I worry, it's one thing to allow it in zoning. I think it's another thing to force it through zoning, because if you have developers saying, we don't think there's a demand and there's a cost challenge, and the jurisdiction forces it, then what you wind up with is less housing development And I think the challenge, it makes the housing crisis worse, right? And it makes the affordability challenges even worse. And so, I don't know the answer to that. So I guess I'm just kind of sharing some frustration of, it sounds great. It sounds to be what people want. It seems like it helps with, the SCS, but how do you get from here to there, right? How do we do more of that?
Definitely. And to some of your points, Director Bradford, we are currently contracting with Cascadia, and they're doing a demand analysis that does include a developer and builder focus groups. And so we'll probably be bringing that to this committee sometime, I forget the exact date, but early summer, probably next year, I think is the date, but we'll have more info on that. But that study will hopefully address some of your questions and concerns. And then we are doing, as I mentioned, we're doing a developer and builder focus group. So we hope to tackle some of these issues kind of head on with those groups through active engagement.
Okay. Thank you. Any more comments or questions from committee members? Okay, seeing none. Any public comment on this item?
There's
Robert?
no public comment.
Okay. So with that, we will move on to item 5, reports. Any committee members have any reports? Okay. Any staff? Any reports from staff? No. Okay, we have one receive and file item. Our next meeting is maybe Thursday, December 7th. Clint, do you know if we're going to have that meeting or not? It's not decided yet.
I think we'll follow up with the committee. I think we're still examining that.
Okay.
So we'll follow up in the coming weeks.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for your great questions and your discussion and feedback. And everyone have a great afternoon. And with that, we will adjourn.
And we'll see you next Thursday, November 9th. Don't forget, just a week from today.
Thank you.
Great.